Hypercalcemia is one form of endocrine emergency which is relatively rare, but it is often associated with long-term complications and often missed because of the lack of overall awareness in that regard. So what we'll do is that we'll be focusing about the different aspects of hypercalcemia, and that would basically include cases related to hyperparathyroidism, which were confused with vitamin D deficiency, and vice versa, pituitary parathyroid adenoma, possibility of carcinoma, then non-PTH dependent causes. So all we'll discuss in that perspective, and we'll be joined by our colleagues in that regards. Now, all of you can go and have a look at our MediClasses Pediatric Endocrinology website, learning.growsociety.in, which has got a lot of information about these aspects, as well as various courses which are available there. And we have recently launched our book, Advances in Pediatric Endocrinology. Three major investigations which will really give you a diagnosis, and we'll focus on these predominantly. I would say the most important, of course, is the phosphorus. Everybody who has hypercalcemia should have a high phosphorus. I'm talking in the same way when I say hypocalcemia should have a low phosphorus. Similarly, hypercalcemia should have a high phosphorus except if there is a PTH problem. So if you have a calcium sensing receptor defect, hyperparathyroidism, or Jansen's disease, these are the increased PTH effect, phosphorus will be low. Everywhere else it will be high. So phosphorus becomes important in that regards. The second, of course, is PTH. Everybody who has hyperparathyroidism should have a high PTH, while others will have a low PTH. Now, what is important to understand is that what do you mean by a high PTH in hypercalcemia, Dr. Pratik?
Any PTH more than level of 20 at the time of hypercalcemia is hyperparathyroidism.
So we need to understand that the PTH should theoretically be low. It should be 0 in the setting of hypercalcemia. But if your PTH is more than 20, you should start thinking that this is hyperparathyroidism. This is an important concept to understand. So phosphorus, PTH, and the third, of course, is urinary calcium. Everybody with hypercalcemia should have hypercalciuria, because if you have more in blood, more in urine. The only condition would be a calcium sensing receptor defect, and second, Naveen, thiazide diuretics, because they will cause falsely hypercalciuria, and that's why we'll talk about how urinary calcium become important to evaluate in that regards. So if you just look at phosphorus, PTH, and urinary calcium, your diagnosis is done. Vitamin D, of course, if you have a history, you can think of vitamin D, and calcitriol, if you're talking about the setting in which you have a vitamin D dependent cause, you have got a high phosphorus, but your 25 OHD is not high. Then you do calcitriol in that setting, and PTH is 0. So mainly these first three, phosphorus, PTH, and urinary calcium, will give you the diagnosis in most cases. That's what is most important. So now, as we discussed, there is a log linear relationship between calcium and PTH. As the calcium goes up, PTH goes down. So anybody who has got hypercalcemia with a PTH more than 20 is hyperparathyroidism. Less than 20 is PTH independent. But this is not absolute. You have to look at other picture as well. But this concept is important. So as for hyperinsulinism, any detectable insulin during hypoglycemia is significant. Any detectable PTH or PTH more than 20 is significant in hypercalcemia. Don't say, okay, PTH is 40, it cannot be hyperparathyroidism. No, that's not true. More than 20 is significant, and this is an important concept which has to be looked into in that regards. So now, before we go into cases, just to summarize, look at the PTH level. If the PTH level is below 20, we are talking about a PTH independent cause in that setting, then most likely vitamin D. So look at vitamin D. If it is high, it is vitamin D toxicity. If the vitamin D is normal, look at calcitriol. If the calcitriol is high, it means that there is something going wrong which is causing more production. Is it fatty necrosis? Is it sarcoidosis? We'll discuss about that. If that is also normal, then you're talking about some immobilization, hypophosphatasia, all those lytic lesions, they will become important, and then clinical picture will guide you. If your PTH is above 20, then you're dealing with hyperparathyroidism or a calcium sensing receptor defect. Now, hyperparathyroidism, the PTH will be very high, but sometimes it is difficult. So then you look at a fractional excretion of calcium. If the fractional excretion of calcium is more than 2%, this is clearly hyperparathyroidism. If it is 1 to 2%, it may be falsely low because of Vitamin
D deficiency and one more thing, thiazide.
So you look at vitamin D level. If vitamin D is normal, then you think of hyperparathyroidism. If vitamin D is low, you give a trial of calcium and vitamin D and see whether it increases. If it is increasing, you go more in favor of a hyperparathyroidism. If it is less than 1%, it is usually a calcium sensing receptor defect. But again, if vitamin D is normal, then that is confirmed. If vitamin D is low, it can still be a masked hyperparathyroidism. So what I'm trying to say is that the most important investigation is PTH. PTH low, vitamin D related, do 25 OHD and calcitriol. PTH high, look at urinary calcium. And based upon that and fractional excretion of calcium will decide whether it is a calcium sensing receptor defect versus a primary hyperparathyroidism. Management is absolutely different. For primary hyperparathyroidism, you have to do surgery. For hypocalciuria or in the form of a benign hypercalcemia, you don't need to do surgery. It is not going to cure in that perspective. Remember that vitamin D deficiency can play spoil sport and that can cause confusion in that setting.
Now, this was the case of a 17-year-old boy who presented to us last month. He had chief complaints of anorexia, weakness, nausea for the last 2 months. Coming to the present history, it was insidious onset of nausea 2 months back, gradually progressive, no relation with meals, no relation with timing of the day, no specific aggravating or relieving factors, not associated with abdominal pain and not associated with headache. There was generalized fatigue also for the last 1.5 months, gradually progressive, persistent in nature, no muscular pain, not relieved with rest. There was no history suggestive of any liver or kidney disease, no history of joint pain or rash, no history of polyuria or weight loss, no history of increased pigmentation, salt craving, no history of any known illness, not on any medication. Coming to the past history, there was no similar history and there was no history of any hospital admission. On general examination, all his vitals were normal and there was no pallor, cyanosis, jaundice, clubbing or edema. Coming to the anthropometry, his BMI was slightly on the higher side and the rest were all normal. On systemic examination also, no abnormality was detected. So as you can see, all non-specific symptoms along with the systemic examination not revealing anything. So generally, we will try to go by the differential diagnosis at this point of time, which was of any chronic systemic illness which might not have flared up at this point of time. The other being dyselectrolytemia, and after ruling out of all these causes, we'll consider any acute psychological causes of the same which might be there. Now, the investigations which were done revealed a SGPT, creatinine, sodium, potassium, cortisol, thyroid function, and sugar levels which were found to be normal.
Creatinine will be a bit high,
but
for the level of the, but his height was more.
Height is 182. Yes. Now, what came back in the next lot of investigations were of a calcium which was of 17, very, very high, along with a phosphorus which was low, which was 2.1.
So what will you think here now?
So this is, as you just said, this is increased PTH effect. Now the cause of this effect.
What do you think about the calcium levels?
So hugely increased.
So what do you think in terms of a parathyroid problem, if you think of?
So just by going by the calcium level, the severity of the problem, we have to think of a parathyroid carcinoma which might be present.
Okay, carry on.
Now the vitamin D and PTH levels which came back, the PTH was 865 and his vitamin D was 22, which was normal.
So again, this is a very, very important point. Last slide we said that your PTH is usually less than 100 in most cases. It's more than 20, but less than 100. But if you have 800, you have to start worrying about something big, something abnormal happening. So either there is a very big lesion or this could be a carcinoma that you have to worry about. And if somebody presents to you with such level of calcium, always think of a malignancy in that setting.
Now this was, as I already mentioned, an increased PTH effect. Now, the cause of this increased PTH effect, is there any lesion which is secreting it? Is it an adenoma? Is it a carcinoma? Or is it an impaired calcium sensing? Now, the impaired calcium sensing part was ruled out by the urinary calcium creatinine ratio, which was found to be high in this case.
Which impaired calcium sensing will cause calcium of 17 at this age?
No, sir, none.
It
So
cannot.
only I found a case report, which was very rare, is that a familial hypocalciuric hypercalcemia, chronic stimulation of the parathyroid, which is causing a parathyroid adenoma, which presented at around 14 years. This is a very rare case.
Or maybe if you have a lot of autoimmunity, those antibodies can be causing that inactivation, can
Okay.
rarely cause
Okay.
that. But usually it's unlikely.
Yes, sir.
If
Unlikely.
it's such severe, it will be neonatal
Yes, sir.
presentation. That's an autosomal recessive presentation.
Now, coming to the portion of increased PTH effect, is it a parathyroid adenoma or is it a parathyroid carcinoma? Now, the features in this patient, which were of mild non-specific symptoms, were for a parathyroid adenoma. There was no neck swelling, again going in for a case of a parathyroid adenoma, but the very high PTH and calcium levels always told that there is a concern of malignancy, and we always have to be aware of the same. Now, coming to the points for parathyroid carcinoma, these patients generally have very severe symptoms. There is usually a neck swelling, and along with that, very high PTH and calcium levels. So this is again a borderline case which we need to follow up by investigations to rule out the carcinoma part. Now, this is a representative image. The reports which I'll present to you are of the patient. Now, the USG report of the patient came, as I have already mentioned, is that a well-defined homogeneously hypoechoic nodule, as you can already see in the photograph presented. The size of which was 1.8 into 1.3 into 1.3 centimeter, which was suggestive of a right inferior parathyroid gland. And how is the parathyroid gland? What are the other features of the parathyroid gland on a USG? Is that on color Doppler, you have a peripheral and eccentric vascularity, which you see. So the points in favor of a parathyroid adenoma in this case is that the homogeneously well-defined regular border and a hypoechoic nodule. Now, the final impression was that of an enlarged parathyroid gland in all the 4 regions, the largest of which was of a right inferior parathyroid gland. This was followed up by a MEB scan. Now, this is also again a representative image, but the reports are of the patient. The technetium MEB uptake by thyroid gland was fair at 30 minutes. Increased uptake seen below lower aspect of right lower thyroid, which persists in the delayed image at 2 hours, while thyroid shows normal washout. So in the image above, you can see that the parathyroid has technetium MEB uptake at 30 minutes, but that is being washed out at 2 hours. And the only part which you can see at 2 hours is of the significant pathological parathyroid lesion. And the impression of the MEB scan was of a right inferior parathyroid adenoma.
Which is, but how to differentiate adenoma from carcinoma?
So just by going by USG or scan?
No, final diagnosis.
So final diagnosis, it is only and only by pathology.
And even in pathology, you cannot distinguish unless you show invasion.
Yes, sir.
So all this is, you can't say it's adenoma or carcinoma, you say it's a parathyroid lesion. So final diagnosis is based on invasion. That's an important parameter.
Okay. Sir. Now coming to the management of the patient, as his calcium levels were around 17, we first need to medically manage his hypercalcemia initially. This was done for this patient, and in between, workup was initiated for the causation of the same. MRI brain was done for a pituitary adenoma or any pheochromocytoma which might be lingering. Workup was also done for the effects of the level of hypercalcemia. A renal USG was done, DEXA was done, both of which came out to be normal.
So he did not have nephrocalcinosis.
No.
This is very, very important. What does it mean, Manoj?
Means secretion is calcium is not secreted.
Calcium is 17. Which means it's a recent onset. It is not an old lesion. If it was old, the second point, as I said, is that because PTH is 800, it is also increasing calcium but also taking it from the kidneys. So that is the problem in this setting. But if anybody with vitamin D excess will have 100% you will have severe nephrocalcinosis. So this is a recent thing, and very high PTH is actually saving in that regard.
Now the genetic study came out later, which came out to be normal, ruling out cases of men 1, men 2. So after controlling his calcium levels, the child was operated for a parathyroid adenoma multiglandular disease. The surgery was undertaken with calcium level of around 12.5. He underwent bilateral neck exploration with right inferior parathyroid adenoma excision, plus right and left superior parathyroidectomy, along with partial thymectomy and left superior parathyroid reimplant. Now, the thymectomy was done in this case before the genetic results arrived. This was done keeping in mind the Men syndrome which might occur.
Generally, they remove anything else.
So,
Any other reason why you remove the thymus?
So,
For men, one.
Ectopic parathyroid may also
Yes,
be there in the thymus. That's why they will do that, because it was such a big lesion. That's why they would have removed that, because ectopic parathyroid may also be there. So you don't want to miss it there.
Now, this is the most important thing, to watch for the intraoperative PTH drop after removal of the thyroids. Now, in this case, you see coming down from 800 to 38, very, very significant drop. So you can imagine that the pathological lesion causing the drive of PTH was removed. Now, the post-operative course of this patient, that this child developed calcium levels of 8.1 within 2 days of his OT. The PTH level dropped to 1.5. He was managed with very high dose of calcium, around 1 grams thrice, that is 3 grams per day, along with rocaltrol of 0.25 micrograms BD.
So why did he develop hypocalcemia?
So one is the PTH stimulus, which is driving the calcium reabsorption from the bone, that is gone. Now the bones are very hungry. It will want all the calcium for itself. Second is that it was a very high PTH level. The receptors were all desensitized. Now this PTH cannot drive the processes which PTH does.
And other part may be atrophic. The remaining part of the parathyroid
Yes,
may
sir.
be atrophic.
Yes, yes. Now on follow-up, this child will be followed up 3 monthly with calcium and PTH levels. As we are following up for the last 1 month, his calcium requirements are gradually becoming reduced, and he's doing well presently.
So a 30-year-old lady presented again with renal stones, but now for the past 1 month. There was a history of renal stones past 1 month. There was a history of PCKD in her brother as well as father. And there was history of renal stones in her brother as well. So again, like the previous case, no history of polyuria. Basically, it was not a symptomatic hypercalcemia. No evidence of any pheochromocytoma symptoms. No evidence of any pituitary adenoma symptoms. No history of any MEN1 related carcinoma, MEN related tumor symptoms. No history of any jaw swelling or any mass. No family history of any calcium related disorders. One important point was that she was not on any incriminating drugs, but thiazides were going on because of her hypertension.
But what do you expect the effect of thiazide?
So I expect that the urinary calcium creat will be falsely low.
And serum
calcium will be higher. So on examination, vitals were stable, no lymphadenopathy for any tumor or carcinoma, no history of any thyroid nodule, no abdominal mass. So this was the initial investigations. Her calcium was slightly higher, around 10.93. Phosphorus was low at 2.73. PTH was 202. TSH, etc. was normal, and vitamin D also was in normal range.
So what do you think here it is, the diagnosis is?
So here we have a primary hyperparathyroidism, but of course we have to do urine calcium and see everything. So again, urinary calcium creatinine ratio came high, which was 55.5, and DEXA showed clear-cut osteoporosis. So now that is what I want to really discuss, whether we can just think of an adenoma, or we have to do something extra to rule out other things. So keeping in mind the multiple endocrine neoplasia, we did a urinary fractionated metanephrine, which took some time. So in that time, we got CT adrenals also done, which was normal. Serum prolactin also came in non-tumor range. And finally, the system AV scan was done, which showed the right superior parathyroid adenoma. So final diagnosis was a hypercalcemia secondary to isolated right parathyroid adenoma. A right superior parathyroidectomy done, as opposed to the previous case where the complete parathyroidectomy was done. This was an isolated parathyroid removal was done, and which following this there was clinical and biochemical improvement. So an important point, this is from a medical classes, from there we see the various genes that can be incriminating in the various causes of hyperparathyroidism. If you think of sporadic causes, think of CCD1 or PRAD1. CDC73, a very sinister cause causing jaw tumor and carcinoma. MEN1, MEN2A. Now, important in this is MEN1 and MEN2A. in our case, MEN1 seems unlikely because the first presentation of MEN1 is pituitary hyperparathyroidism, and in the first or second decade of life. MEN2A, as Sir also mentions, any adult with a patient who comes with hyperparathyroidism, we have to rule out pheochromocytoma without doing anything else. So if in a MEN1 case, if it is detected, of course, MEN1 case, how do we see if there is one of the major criteria such as hyperparathyroidism, any hyperparathyroidism, pancreatic tumor, or any of the other major criteria with family history, then we go for any of these. And if you detected the MEN1 as early as 8 years of age, you have to look for parathyroid problems, and the various ages of screening are given here in this table. Important point over here is how do we differentiate between whether it is familial or sporadic parathyroid adenoma. In sporadic cases, which was more in the case I presented, the severity is lower. Multiple adenoma is unlikely. She had just an isolated adenoma. Jaw tumor was not there. Presentation was slightly early, and we were expecting low risk. And again, she has come back with, she's absolutely fine after her surgery.
This was a 25-year-old female who came to us with chief complaints of repeated fractures since the last 6 months. Now, the present history, there was first a left shaft femur fracture, followed by a right shaft femur fracture after 2 months. Then finally, she had a right neck femur fracture, and all of these fractures were caused due to trivial trauma. This was also associated with long-term bone pain, increased frequency of urination, and increased thirst. Now, on examination, there was a swelling of the left mid-cervical region, firm in consistency, non-tender, 3 centimeter into 2 centimeter size, mobile. Skin over the swelling was normal, not moving with deglutition. Her BP was also found to be normal. Now, the investigations which arrived showed us a PTH of around 2,109, calcium of 14.9, phosphorus of 2.6, and the ionized calcium levels were 1.86 millimoles per liter.
So this is very, very important in that setting. You're talking about a very, very high PTH.
Yes.
So if we look at the 4 cases that we have seen till now, the first one had around 100. The second was talking about 800. The third was around 200, and this is 2000. So this is the highest. So this is clearly malignancy. The calcium level is not that high, but your PTH is very, very high. And this is the only case in which we had a neck swelling. No other case had a neck swelling. So you said neck swelling, very high PTH, and third is pathological fractures. None of them had a pathological fracture. So this is something which has happened very acutely, very severe, and causing a lot of problems. So this you have to think about clearly a case of a parathyroid carcinoma in that situation.
Now, these were the X-rays. The first one shows us a fractured neck femur along with the shaft. The second, a fracture of the left femoral shaft. And the third is characteristic of these cases of a hyper PTH state is of subperiosteal resorption. Now, the ultrasonography of the patient revealed us a well-defined heterogeneous hypoechoic lesion, increased vascularity at the left cervical region, 3 centimeter into 1 centimeter size. So this is the difference from my previous case. This is the heterogeneous swelling. The ultrasound kidney revealed a bilateral medullary nephrocalcinosis with renal calculi. So this was the complication which wasn't present in my previous case. And this is the area which I have marked in black is of the kidney stones which are present in this case. So the provisional diagnosis according to the symptoms of the patient followed up with the levels of PTH and the neck swelling is of a parathyroid carcinoma. Now this patient has been planned for a CT scan to further guide us to the swelling and of the invasions if we can make out on the CT. It is pending.
And we started.
Yeah. And to manage his extremely high calcium levels and the symptoms which the patient is having of recurrent fractures, we started the patient of Cinacalcet, and the patient will be followed up next week.
So I think this is again a quick case, Vignet, a quick message that if your calcium is very high, PTH is very high, there is a fracture, always consider a possibility of a parathyroid carcinoma, and that becomes important. I think a very important message which came from this case is that although we can think of clinically that if your calcium is very high and if you have got very high PTH, think of a malignancy. But again, it did not happen in this case, but maybe this is something which we have to be concerned about. Now, what is the role of localization studies in a child like this child with 18 years? Do we need to do a localization study? Now, what we need to understand is that the multifocal disease is much more common in young adults. So generally, we are not talking about just removing the adenoma. We're talking about much wider excision. So localization study is not going to decide about what surgery you have to do in that regards. It's mainly to plan in the sense what is you expect, but it is not going to change your treatment in that regards. Very importantly, it should be considered after infancy, especially if there is a family history which is there. But less than 30 years of age, multifocal disease is much more common. So if you do just a adenoma removal, it may come back again. So that you have to be wary about. MEB scan is what we do, and subtraction study will give you an idea. Genetic testing, as was done in this case, is important because if you have a genetic cause, you can then decide about what all other things I have to look into and what is the likelihood of recurrence. So you can look at calcium sensing receptor, especially if there is a doubt. If there is a family history and the FECA is persistently in the borderline range, then if you do a parathyroid surgery, what will happen? Will your calcium become normal in calcium sensing receptor problem? Because your urinary calcium will be less, so you will not cure that. So it should not be done in that setting. And you have to do PTH genes with early onset, multiple, and there are various genes which Dr. Pratik will also talk about in that setting. Now, what about treatment? Sayan has already talked about that the major acute treatment is to bring the calcium down. The options include saline diuresis. So you give double volume maintenance fluid with furosemide, and that is going to cause a fall in calcium by around 2 to 3 milligram per DL. Never give furosemide without hydration, because dehydration will be there and that will cause worsening of the clinical condition. The other options, of course, are in the form of using of steroids. That's mainly in vitamin D excess, as we'll discuss about subsequently. There could also be a role of calcitonin, but that again has a tachyphile excess. So it's a short acting effect which is there. There could be a use of anti-resorptive agents like pamidronate or denosumab, which can stop the bone resorption, which is effective in that setting. Or you can use a calcium sensing receptor mimetic, which is cinacalcet, which will block PTH production. We'll show how we have used in different phases. Here, saline diuresis was used. In the setting of vitamin D excess, prednisolone is used. In the setting of parathyroid carcinoma, cinacalcet can be used temporarily, and pamidronate in the setting of immobilization. So this is how, in various situations, conditions can be treated in that regards and in that perspective. Now, calcium mimetic, as we've discussed, is going to act on the calcium sensing receptor, and it is going to help decrease the PTH level. It is the most common agent that we talk about include the cinacalcet, and it is usually used in this setting for parathyroid carcinoma, which we were discussing in that setting. The other option is also the injectable preparation, which is not easily available in that regards. Now, what do we do if there is hyperparathyroidism? Now, these are the guidelines from the American Association, and what they clearly say is that in everybody who is less than 40 years of age, you have to do surgery. The main debate in hyperparathyroidism is in older individuals whom you are detecting hyperparathyroidism early, who do not have a bone disease, who do not have a calcification, who do not have a hypercalciuria, whether you do surgery or not. But everybody who is less than 40 requires surgery, so there is no debate. If you are wanting to follow up, look for their bone health, look for their kidney functions, look for their urinary calcium, and if it is normal, only then you avoid. Otherwise, surgery is clearly the treatment of choice, which is there in most cases. And otherwise, they talk about osteoporosis, fragility, fracture, hypercalciuria, and nephrocalcinosis and refraction in that regards. So anybody who is young requires surgery. Anybody who has a renal dysfunction, anybody who has a hypercalciuria, nephrocalcinosis requires surgery. If you are not doing surgery, you have to monitor calcium, blood and urine, along with ultrasound and other parameters as well in that setting. Now, very importantly, what surgery to be done? Now, if there is a simple adenoma, do a resection. But usually in younger individuals, it's a multifocal disease. So you have to be careful. Other options for MEN1 is actually MEN1 is going to be multifocal. So you have to do a subtotal resection, which is recommended. For neonatal age group, you do a near total with autotransplantation. And for MEN2A is the only form in which you just remove the visible gland. So by knowing the underlying diagnosis is therefore important. Now, this case, there was no clear-cut genetic cause, so they did the resection in that setting, and that resulted in an improvement. And look at three major things: phosphorus, PTH, and urinary calcium. Your diagnosis is done. High, normal phosphorus, PTH independent, PTH more than 20, PTH dependent, and urinary calcium low. It is a calcium sensing receptor defect. This will give you a diagnosis. So consider hypercalcemia in anybody who has failure to thrive, polyuria, constipation, hypertension. PTH, 25 OHD are key. I will also add phosphorus as well as urinary calcium in the setting, which will help you out. And initial management in many cases is hydration, diuretics. We considered cinacalcet in the setting of somebody who had malignancy. We considered bisphosphonate in the setting of immobilization, and of course steroids in somebody who has an increased 1-alpha hydroxylase action in that point.